Okay, one argument that I'm getting a lot is, well, it's not really an argument so much as a demand, and it's a demand for objective initial classification of races in humans. And this is a very strange thing, and what it, I won't go, maybe I'll go into what it reflects later on, but take what we now call a Clydesdale and an Arabian horse. How did those conceptions come about? Well, what you have is you have things. You have these things. These things, they look like horses. Oh, they look like horses, do they? Okay, we'll call them horses. But they look like different kinds of horses. They look like different kinds of horses, do they? Okay, so we'll call them different kinds of horses. Okay. Um, and then, once we've said, okay, this looks like a Clydesdale, this looks like an Arabian, then you begin to document differences between them. Well, the Clydesdales aren't as fast as an Arabian, but they can pull a plow better, or they don't get hurt as much, or Clydesdales do better in cold weather, Arabians do better in hot weather. Go figure. Clydesdales tend to have larger hooves, thicker coats, smaller nostrils. And you can come up with all these different things that separate a Clydesdale from an Arabian, and so you have like a big old list, a big old compendium of differences between Clydesdales and Arabians. And there you go. But once you've done this and you've documented extensively the differences between Clydesdales and Arabians, what if someone came along and said, okay, you've shown me lots of differences between the Clydesdales and Arabians, but how did you come to the idea that these are two different quote-unquote breeds of horses from the outset? Well, they look different. And that's the first and the last of it, quite frankly. And moreover, let's say you look at different breeds of horses and you come up with some objective rubric. Excuse me, a rubric with reference to objective traits. It's not an objective rubric. It is a subjective rubric with reference to objective traits. It is it is objectively subjective. So, and the traits could be bone structure, coat, muscle structure, muscle type distribution, and what you can do is you can have like different bands. You can say, okay, distribution of muscle fibers along a continuum. If it's along this continuum, it's more towards the Clydesdale side, and we'll say, okay, this horse is, 0.7 towards Clydesdale. Oh, it's 0.3 towards Arabian. Okay, 0.8 towards Clydesdale on this trait. 0.9 towards Clydesdale on this trait. Oh, 0.3, and that's towards Arabian, with a 0.5 is in between the two, right? And you can have all these different rubrics, and then come up with a final score which says, okay, this horse is a Clydesdale or an Arabian. And you can, and that's fine. And you can say that, well, that's a rubric that I came up with. And this, based on this rubric, I can tell you that according to this rubric, this is a Clydesdale. According to this rubric, this is an Arabian. According to this rubric, this is a Shamalama Ding Dong, okay? But so what? Right? The idea that these are the criteria, or that this is a useful criteria with which to distinguish horse breeds, well, that's just like your opinion, man. Okay? And that's all it is. Another thing we could look at is I could say, well, the reason that seat is hotter than this other seat is that seat is black and this other seat is white. And the color black absorbs heat and gets hotter. Okay, and you could say, okay, well that's nice, and then I could say, well, look, they've both been in the same sun with no shade, and I could somehow measure the temperature? Well, first off, you can just put your finger on it and you can tell which is hotter, or you could put a thermometer somehow and tell which is hotter that way. Okay, and I could do all that, and then someone else could say, okay, I see that there are differences in temperature between these two seats, but how did you come to the conclusion that this one is quote unquote black and this one is quote unquote white? How did you come to the conclusion that these are two different quote unquote colors? Well, because they look different. That's why. That's how. Right. Look at a spectrum of colors. See red, orange, yellow, green, purple, blue. You know, pink. Pink? Is there a pink? Turquoise? Does turquoise exist? Or is turquoise not different enough from green and blue to exist? Why do we say that green and blue are different colors? Well, because they look different. Okay, but what's the objective? Right, no such thing. You can say, well, here are wavelength differences, and if it's this different, then it's a different color. In order for two different points in wavelength to be different colors, they have to be this far apart to be different colors. But of course, this then gets into a continuum problem, because then okay. So let's say it has to be 100 wavelength points different to be different colors. Okay, what if you're at two different... What if you have this thing that is only 50 wavelengths apart from this other thing? Is it a different color? No. Okay, how about 50 from that one, 50 from that, 50 from that, and then you work all the way across the color spectrum, come to the conclusion that there are, in fact, no colors, because at no point do you compare two different things that are more than 50 wavelength points apart, and your criteria is 100, right? And so you can get into kind of continuum silliness that way, and that is of course the continuum fallacy. It's basically saying, well, because it's continuous, that there's no, it's like saying there's no black people because they blend in from from the tip of Africa to Scandinavia. With no clear hard breaks. Now, in reality, there are kind of hard breaks between Egypt and Sudan, for example. There is a pretty hard break there. Not so much a hard break going up from the Middle East to the Balkans to the Mediterranean countries into Central and then Northern Europe. That's definitely more of a continuum right there. But there are in fact hard breaks. Anyway, so. And there's also, and this is, of course, is not, this is more of an addendum to my other video, Does Race Exist? But this is more just to deal with the idea, the weird kind of category denial. And the way it's being done is by demanding an objective initial classification. The idea of an objective initial classification is really weird. I don't even know what such a thing would even be, what an objective initial classification would look like. I know what classification systems look like, but those aren't done initially. Those are, right, what people do is they go out into the world, they look at traits in animals, they come up with their own classification systems, and then classify according to their classification systems. Which is fine. I mean, they want to do that, they can do that, but that's just like your opinion, man. Okay? They refer to objective things out in reality, but they themselves are not objective. They're just a system. That's it. There's nothing inherently true to them any more than, okay, well, you say half the spectrum, half the visible spectrum is purple or violet or whatever. Well, okay, that's just your opinion, man. I still don't think half of all the colors are purple. Why? Well, because my subjective conception is that that purple is just one color. Right? Sorry. My subjective conception is that purple is just one color, not half the color spectrum. Not half of all colors don't exist in what I see as purple, and it doesn't, right? Because I see red and yellow and orange as different colors, right? And you can come up with your objective rubric. Well, no, according to the wavelength differences, purple is half the visible spectrum. Well, that's just like your opinion, man. Okay? So, yeah, categories aren't objective, right? And the categories that we work with that precede science aren't written in the heavens. Okay, there's not like God didn't come from on high and say, here be the categories of existence. This is a tree. This is the Platonic essence of a tree. Here's how you mathematically define what is a tree versus what is a shrub versus what is a flower versus what is a bee, right? It's not it's not that way. What exists out there is just stuff, and in our opinion, this stuff conforms to certain patterns. And these patterns we then lump into categories, and we call them different animals, different species of animals, different breeds of animals and plants. But that's just like your opinion, man. Right? That's all it is. Okay? And so when someone wants to say race doesn't exist, okay, well, what are you saying? Are you saying that pygmies don't exist? Like, if we took some pygmies and put them next to Danes, would you say that, oh, I can't, which one's the Dane, which one's the pygmy? I can't tell because race doesn't exist. Is that what you're saying? If not, then you're just a sophist. I mean, if you're not saying that you can't tell the difference between a pygmy and a Dane, then you're just playing games, okay? And that's what it comes down to, right? Because if you want to say race doesn't exist, oh, okay, so pygmies are indistinguishable, are undifferentiatable from, ethnic Swedes and Norwegians, right? Is that what we're saying? Or can you tell the difference? Well, if you can tell the difference, well, suddenly then they're clearly a different kind of people, right? You can tell them apart. If you want to say, well, here's some mathematical rubric that I made up, and according to this rubric, which tells what differences you have to have in order to be a different breed, they do not fit that rubric. Well, good for you. So you can't tell them apart because they don't fit your rubric? Right? But, well, and there's another problem. If you can tell pygmies and Danes apart, but they're not distinguishable on the basis of some rubric, well, maybe rethink the rubric, right? Let me put it another way. Let's say you had some objective criteria with which you used to distinguish colors, but with this objective set of criteria, you could not distinguish yellow from orange. Yellow and orange just showed up as one thing on your criteria. You could not. Well, that would tell me that your criteria is problematic. Now you could say, no, it isn't. The conception of yellow and orange is just a social construct, which of course it is, because all categories are social construct. That's a trivial truth. So, yeah, that's just what I wanted to say here. I always have difficulty ending my videos, so I'm getting in the habit of just ending them at the end.